So this year already in May, I was hosting a side event at the Basel COP, basically with a very similar title, because the main objective of the Basel Convention is to support environmentally sound management of substances, and e-waste is one of them. And the reason for today's event basically is that roughly 20 years ago, some people in Switzerland started working on something called e-waste with relations to the global south, and we have seen a lot of projects being implemented, be it through the Sustainable Recycling Initiative or other GSZ projects, or the STEP initiative, or ITU is doing a lot of laudable good work, or the Prevent Waste Alliance, or the STEP initiative. And it was a lot about, okay, we're possibly at a time where we should, let's say, use all the knowledge that has been created and summarize what we have done, because some of us, we are project oriented and projects might end. And we actually want to, let's say, share the knowledge we have created in the past years. And my co-moderator or host of the session today, Tobias, we will, let's say, set the scene a little bit and then allow our panelists to contribute to the discussion. And then we will hopefully get a lively discussion with our participants. And I will start, I decided to start with something positive, because we have all this negative news all the time about sustainability, and then I thought, well, e-waste as well, quite often we talk about negative aspects, and then I said, okay, we'll start with something positive, and then I will turn it into something negative. But if we look, for example, on the African continent, what has happened with mobile phones is just remarkable and incredible. So the access to mobile phones and smartphones has been increasing massively. It was market driven, and it's something inherently good. And people have access to more services from devices, and it improves livelihoods of people. And there's something very, very good. The downside of that development is that at a certain stage, it will turn into e-waste. So we have to do something about it. But the reason why more and more countries need to do more on e-waste is because people can afford services, which is something very, very good. And as well in Africa, you see a lot of leapfrogging. So talking about mobile money, good luck with that in Germany or in many countries, but on the African continent, in many, many countries, you can see things happening. So I'm quite positive about some of the change aspects over there. But talking about mobile phone waste, it's maybe one of the easiest things to solve. And these are the numbers from the Global E-Waste Monitor. I think all of us are well aware. We collect whatever 17% globally. And if you look into the, I think there's the collection rates on some continents, be it Africa, 0.9%, or Asia, 11%. So it's just not a lot. So we talk a lot about e-waste, but if you really look into collection rates, it's very low. And if you look into collection rates of mobile phones in the circularity report of GSMA, they're extremely low. So we're kind of lagging behind a little bit in the implementation. And Tobias will now speak a little bit about why this can be problematic.
Yeah, sure. Just to start the fire, thank you for coming at 2:15 p.m. Right after lunch, and I hope you will not fall asleep. So this is actually something that we've been working on for a couple of years now, and actually it's the focus on lead. We had this in the SRI project and other projects as well. And this was actually the result of a study that we did a couple of years ago. And what you see here is industrial lead recycling. Actually, there will be a whole workshop on it tomorrow, so I will not go too much into detail here. But what you see here, the blood levels of lead in the people's body is like should not be higher than 5 5 microgram per deciliter, and from there you can suffer from reduced IQ if you're a kid. Higher than 20% of children are affected from gastrointestinal effects, if it's higher than 60 micrograms, and so on. So what we actually measured in a couple of countries were these. It's not us actually, but it's we observed that in studies. So we can see in industrial lead smelting 640 microgram per deciliter. I think that one was in, I can't remember actually which country. So, but it's okay, no words for that. And we, of course, we see with the US, you know, that environmental contamination and so on. So the impacts are well known for you. To you also other hotspots, dioxins, mercury, plastic, and so on. I don't just want to get back together with you why we are here. Why is that so? This is the wrong one, huh? Okay, take this one. Why is that so? And I'm an economist, and I always think like from the economic point of view. And to be honest, the only explanation that I do have, and actually many people understand, is the reason is because markets fail if they're unregulated. What does that mean? You see from the micro economics 101, you have a social marginal cost of any activity. Think of recycling, and this is the upper line here. Yeah, the regulated offer. This is the total social costs of recycling if it's internalized. However, we have unregulated markets in many countries. That means we have this private marginal costs, which is considerably lower. So what happens actually, these costs are externalized to all of us, to the whole society. Pollution happens, as we've seen, and very often this is related to cherry picking. That means in recycling, we know the cherries are taken out and the rest just dumped. So there are two kinds of interventions that are possibly, from the theory, working. It's regulation and enforcement of the regulation and conformity by mandatory rules. This is, if you just say, okay, we do not accept this pollution, we want to push it down to this. However, this has a price. And this is what you can see here. If you enforce it, and if you have a so-called level playing field, then for all the actors, the prices will go up. So the other instrument here would be an economic instrument, tax, eco-levy, and so on. Finally, you will end up at higher prices. As long these markets, recycling markets, are not regulated, pollution will happen. Okay. And this is the last slide from our side before, and then we start with the panel discussion.
Okay, and some 2 years ago, we already hosted a similar event where we had some other panelists, but like the bottom line of what has been just presented by Tobias is that even formal recycling can be polluting unless we have standards in place and financing mechanisms. So it's not only informal, so externalization is a reality, and sustainable recycling is not a profitable business model per se. So that's the bottom line. I would say we have come to agree on, and based on what Tobias just said about market intervention. So we need a financing mechanism to create a level playing field. And the most promising one we see right now is extended producer responsibility. So basically whoever benefits from a product is supposed to pay as well for, let's say, the externalities that are being caused by that. But it's not limited to EPR. There's other ways of financing sustainable e-waste management. But what we see in implementation, that this is rather, it's a long-term strategy, because there's a lag between the, let's say, development of legislation and the implementation actually affecting environmentally sound management. So in a couple of countries, you can have a legislation and it takes 5 to 7 years until you see results on the ground. And the results might be marginal initially. And so if we agree that there is a problem now, we have to do something as well short term. And the other point is, like, if there is kind of an agreement that policy is not enough, that we really have to work on the implementation. So how do we do implementation of legislation? And one of the, I would say, key results of the work of Oeko-Institut, or as well GIZ, is that we need as well to concretely pilot, to move actual e-waste into sustainable treatment. Because it's so easy to solve problems on paper, and then reality is not really ready for our paperwork. But actually doing things is a lot more complicated than writing it. So today's session on e-waste just 3 hours ago was a very lucky coincidence for us, because EcoWork, which we said, okay, that's an example of a market intervention, has been presented there. They will be on a panel today. The Econ pilot, so e-waste compensation, where you have a financing mechanism that allows for financing of sustainable treatment in another country. That's a market intervention where you can actually grow and pilot market behavior somewhere on the ground. Or the pilot incentive scheme will be implemented in Ghana, where we combine the strength of informal collection with sustainable treatment. But market interventions are not enough. It's not a long-term strategy. So in the midterm, we see as well that we need some sort of infrastructure. Otherwise, countries are not unable to treat e-waste. So there's special treatment equipment is necessary over there, but it takes time to develop markets over there. So how do we develop the markets if there is no financing mechanism in place and there's no good incentive to invest in that one? So midterm, we really have to develop markets for sustainable management of e-waste, and maybe establishing a PRO or whatever body that finances everything, and long term as well, product design, fully functional PROs, functional markets. So that's I would say the end game we look at. And a lot of the work, or let's say where we have seen that things have been successful, was as well in multi-actor partnerships. So we're very happy that STEP is as well over here. Daniel, who was instrumental for Prevent, is as well in the room, and as well Circular Electronics Partnership. So these are some of the, let's say, institutions where some source of those at least initial interventions and as well strategies can be discussed, and they're very helpful in finding the solutions. And with that, I would say we will end our input, and we will invite our panelists to give their perspectives on what they actually believe would be instrumental to changing things and what they have been doing in the past. And with that, I will hand over to Tobias.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alex. So the first panelist that we would like to invite to sit with us is Samson. Samson Adjemo is founding director of the Mountain Research Institute in Ghana. And we would like to discuss with you a couple of questions. Actually, please, we invite you to sit with us. The first question that we would have is what are the key challenges the world faces from your perspective when it comes to e-waste recycling? And more importantly, the second question, what are from the top of your mind success factors and proven concepts in light of what you've seen just a minute ago? So the next 5 minutes are yours. Just talk what is on top on your mind.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here once again in the World Resources Forum to share ideas on what we see from the global south as the problem with respect to electronic waste. Then one of the key challenges we face is what has been discussed in the plenary this afternoon: excessive consumerism of electronic appliances, as presented by both Alex and Tobias. Ghana, we jumped the technology pathway. So we moved from analog straight to mobile technology. And this has come with huge back-end support that require a lot of massive deployment of IT equipment. Because of that, we are having high rate of e-waste generation. This is coupled with the importation or dumping of secondhand appliances that have very short lifespan. Again, the import of brand new appliances from especially the Asian region into our country, Ghana, it's really just like the brand new ones. It's just like the secondhand ones. They have short lifespans. For example, in the year 2014, we faced a lot of electricity crisis because of that. People were importing rechargeable lamps into the country, and these rechargeable lamps were as good as at the time you bought them. You can buy a lamp, take it home, and it doesn't work. Meanwhile, it is brand new and in a well packaged. It is well packaged for you. And so these are the multiple sources of challenge we are facing with the consumption of electronic items. Now, the success factors that have been presented in Ghana, we are piloting the incentive-based system of collection. Now, currently, this is financed by a German corporation. We started together with Alex on the pilot collection of cables using funds provided by the GIZ e-waste program. And this has been taken up by the KFW e-waste program that is currently implemented together with the Ministry of Environment. Is it the way to go? Do we have to depend only on donor support to do this kind of collection? The answer is no. We have to develop homegrown approaches. Now, seeing that we have in our country a very, very informal economy, from upstream import to downstream collection of electronic appliances. And so implementation of the typical European style extended producer responsibility is not going to work, because you have a lot of free riders in the system who will actually go behind the system and import into the country. Therefore, the government adopted another approach of imposing eco-levy on every appliance that is imported into the country. And this eco-levy is supposed to support the collection and treatment of electronic devices that are brought into, or end-of-life electronic devices that are brought into our country. The challenge is then you create a system where you give the politicians the opportunity to decide what to be done with the money, if especially it is not properly ring-fenced. In our case, luckily for us, we have in our law, e-waste fund that has been established, and my friend Gerard from the e-waste fund can wave here for us to see him. That has been set up to manage these funds. But the truth is, because it is a state-controlled fund, it is subject to all the politics and nuances of state intervention. And so that is where we are having challenge in implementing these funds for implementing sustainable e-waste collection. In my opinion, I think we need to move a step higher from eco-levy to a system where multinationals and actual OEMs will no longer redefine the concept of producer, but rather look at the consumption from their companies as a global issue. Is it possible that in future we can have a global EPR system which is market-based, rather than allowing each country to legislate? Because at one point, they are not happy with government-imposed taxation such as eco-levy. However, they are also unwilling to step down to Ghana, Accra, Kumasi, or Koforidua to dirty their hands in collecting the products of their processes. And so we are faced with these two major challenges, where responsibility is only allocated to the informal guys who come to Europe, buy one-off appliances, and you don't see them again. Yet the OEMs are not willing to pay taxes. These are the nexus we face in our country, and we need to critically think about it if we are to provide sustainable solution across board and create a level playing field for all markets, whether it is Switzerland or Ghana. This is the way I see it.
Thank you very much, Samson, for your opening statement. We will go into the discussion with all the panelists right afterwards, but let us move forward to the next panelist, who we all know actually. It's Matthias Schlurp from the World Resources Forum. So having listened to Samson and a little bit to what we started in the beginning, what do you think? What is what is your, what are your thoughts on those questions if you listen to us?
I cannot really speak from a southern perspective, but more like from a development cooperation perspective. We have been lucky that the Swiss government has funded us and the programs, but I mean all the partners, now for almost 20 years to implement e-waste programs in these countries. And of course, we have learned a lot. And if I would say what I'm convinced has worked and what was important is first, build partnerships. Partnerships in a way that there is commitment and there is also a transfer of ownership. And that includes, and actually I'm happy, with all we are kind of a family here, with all the partners sitting here, they're all experts by now, like Sams and Susan, and there are others who are not here now in the room. We all grew together. So meaning that actually we build up together our expertise in the whole world. So that's one thing. The second thing I think it was that we always, our concept was that we are looking on framework conditions. And our philosophy was that we are not going and say, I mean, you talked about pilots, which I think is important and it's part of the concept, but it cannot be the only one. You also said regulation is very important and the enforcement is very important. So now for example, in the sustainable recycling industries project, we have 4 pillars. And one is the policy pillar, so building up e-waste policies, regulation, enforcement capacity, etc. The second one is more the standards. You also said about level playing field. So that's also important that we say, okay, and mandatory standards, so they have to fulfill the standards. The third one, and now again to the pilots, is about businesses. So we still need, of course, we have to prove concept, we have to support businesses. And the fourth, actually, I want to mention, you did not specifically mention this. We thought, okay, these are all the framework conditions, but in the end, we found out over the years that it's always a problem is the hazardous fractions at the end. So what do we do now? Matthias, you have given us all this concept, but we still don't know what to do with this old CRT screens or with the plastics, etc. So I think that's another pillar which has proven to be very important. So this, yeah, I think that's the most important part. I also learned, I just want to add this, and that was my first experience. I started my first project with Susan together in South Africa. And there actually we thought with our concept of Switzerland, where the producers have developed the first take-back scheme, EPR scheme, probably one of the first in Europe, actually on their own initiative. And we thought that works in other places as well. Well, it didn't work and it will not work in other places. I'm pretty convinced by now, and it's not to blame the producers. It's just, they say, well, some tried and say, yeah, but if the other don't join, I mean, why should we now pay for everything? And the other ones just are happy to jump on the wagon and not paying for anything. So that brings me back to the other thing I said. We need legislation, we need enforcement, we need standards, and we need concepts, proven concepts.
Thank you, Matthias. So that was really a beautiful overview of 20 years of experience. I would guess having 20 years as well can be a success factor, because in the, let's say, project-oriented world we work in, we sometimes expect results to be very quick. And basically what has been seen as well in some of those projects, that it needs time. So we should as well acknowledge that the gratitude of Switzerland that they allowed you to work for that time, and other institutions, and that's playing certainly a role. And so we are proceeding right now to Susanne Karcher, which will give her perspective on it. And in addition to her role in SRI, she is as well in ASEN and SAEVA, and has all sorts of, she's a network in one person.
All rolled in one, exactly. Good. I can only give you the South African perspective, and it's also only my opinion. So please don't think this is the whole of South Africa. And especially if I'm speaking my mind, it might not be everyone agreeing to. Okay. So like a good German, I applied my mind and put a couple of slides together so that I can kind of gather my thoughts. So the first question that we were asked when we were asked to join the panel was the key challenges that we see regards to growing e-waste volumes. And I have to go back all the time. We're talking about systemic change. And what that means to me is, why do we have so much e-waste in the first place? Why do we have so much? It's actually a lack. There's a lack of correct design intention. And, you know, I'm a big fan of the people that say waste is a result of bad design, you know, like the people like Bill McDonough used to say that. And he's right. I think we're just too lazy. We think not long enough and hard enough. So we're ending up with all those waste streams that should actually become technical or biologically nutrients. Then also the other thing that is a challenge is that I don't think there is enough attention to maintain the functionality. And one of the things where it shows, for example, is we look in South Africa at the EPR regulations. There are targets for collection. There are targets for recycling. We don't have targets for repair and refurbishment. So we should please follow the waste hierarchy. And that's my key recommendation for any country introducing EPR, that you actually put it into a circular economy context. Otherwise, you might miss the boat and recyclers will actually dismantle perfectly functional equipment just to make the quota, which is actually really an unintended consequence of this whole thing. Then my preferred subject, okay, unequal services by producers. What do I mean with that? I'm from Germany, I live in South Africa. Big difference, right? Because in Europe, there is the WE directive and the producers toe along those lines. And I can tell you from my own experience, being now proudly Global South citizen, they only do something when they're legally forced. And that was actually what was already coming out. So please take away your blindfolds and think that producers would be nice. They are not, you know, they will have to follow international best practice. This is something that should be requested by producers. Why are countries on the grounds of social weakness disadvantaged in terms of the service that are actually provided to them? And that brings me to the next point that gets me annoyed, which is that the Global South is really a dumping ground. And we see evidence like this for obsolete technology and substances or products. Point in case, compact fluorescent lights, right? Phased out in Europe. Guess where we still get them and where they are going to be imported to? South Africa, Africa, whatever. You know, whoever has the weakest legislation, that's where the stuff gets pushed. So also very unfair. Next slide. So I must do that. Okay. In terms of making a success and the success factors, and this is actually something I really want to discuss with the likes also, because I know the WE Forum has started to talk about it. And I think, yes, let's put this right in center stage. I believe we need a global EPR obligation for producers. And in this global EPR obligation, we need to harmonize key definitions, that there's no doubt, there is no loophole for a producer to understand. Anyone who places product on the market in any country is by definition a producer. We should also harmonize our understanding of how to set EPR fees. Otherwise, we end up with PROs that just offer the cheapest price to join and don't do the job. So that's a very important thing to really, while I'm very skeptical when it comes to globalization, I'm a big fan of globalization. We need globalized regulatory structures. And the EPR regulations, as you have them in place, as we have them in South Africa, yes, but there is also enforcement needed. So, you know, it is the job of the government to institute the EPR regulations, make them mandatory, but also make damn sure that there is enough enforcement capacity, because the day will come very quickly where the PROs come and they whistleblow and they say, those producers haven't listed, because we can see it for all to see, right? But if a government is too scared to enforce the legislation, that really, really, really backfires. So there must be a commitment to prosecute those free riders when they are reported. Obviously, government is always scared of industry because it can be sued into the ground. So be very careful how you formulate your EPR regulations, that the industry can't sue you into the ground. It happened in South Africa. Reuse needs to be motivated as part of the targets. We talked about it. More efforts for meaningful informal integration. informal sector integration. And what I mean with this is really looking at the risks and the opportunities and what affords the informal sector integration, and not just some dummy jobs for the informal sector, but really something leading further. We just developed now training curriculum in South Africa that's currently out for public comment, where we develop a whole module. It's called an e-waste entrepreneur. So you can start out on NQF level 2 as a collector and sorter, and then you can go into a next module to learn about dismantling and depollution, and then you can acquire business skills. And if you do all those 3 modules, you are an e-waste entrepreneur. So I think it's really, really important that we build those bridges, that we build those stairs for people to actually upskill themselves. And then finally, the municipalities, I think, are crucial. And I heard this earlier also from colleagues. They need to be capacitated. I think Lydia alluded to this in my chair session. We need the municipalities. This is where the rubber hits the road. So they need to be capacitated with skills to build e-waste collection and capacity, and also build public-private partnerships with local recyclers. Innovative ideas. Well, first of all, that we can understand what we need for systematic change is that we have for South Africa understand, or actually to understand solutions according to what the global South needs, not what the global North thinks, okay? And just to use South Africa, and that goes for the most of Africa, Africa has a very unique socio-demographic profile, okay? We have a completely different understanding. We have something called a hustlenomics, where people just get by having a couple of jobs. The majority of work activities in Africa is informal. So it does not help to push us into this corset of evaluating via the OECD or whatever, the GDP of a country, because the high inequity of wealth completely draws a wrong picture. You know, we have strong population growth, and people are in the informal. So the best solution would be naturally high labor and low-tech kind of approach. And we need to take cognizance in that. So we need to also not shy away to redefine key performance indicators. Are we really interested of how much money you have or how locally self-reliant you are? And I think we need to shift the goalpost in developing entirely new key performance indicators to really get a better picture of what happens in Africa and how well the people are doing and how equitable wealth is distributed or not. Do we have examples? Yes. I cannot go into much detail, but we have 2 excellent examples. The one is called Taking Care of Business. They started out initially with closing waste from retailers, and then they started something called the Appliance Bank, where they also got from retailers any electronics that have been returned because they are broken or they don't want them anymore. And they train people from the townships to repair those things. It's a very successful program. And then those entrepreneurs go back to the community and sell on what they have learned to repair. Very successful. Another one is a waste beneficiation center. Looking at a bigger picture, they're doing more wicked things like looking at computer plastics and repurposing it into drain pipes, things like this. But those are definitely 2 companies in South Africa or nonprofits that have been very successful in creating jobs and really uplifting community at large. So what do we need for systematic change? Walk in the shoes of the global South, global North. I did, because I live now in the global South. And that means to change the language. That also means to change the attitude. There's still too much top to bottom. We tell you what to do. We know what's good for you. And new KPIs to measure. Move away from GDP. Let's talk about the Gini index. Really, I want to know how equal is the wealth distributed. And move also away from trying to create jobs to making people self-reliant. So build the skills, particularly also for functional recovery from e-waste. So in a global supply chain, the future should be that in Africa, that's where the action happens to recover functionality. I think that is one of the key areas that we need to start developing ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. So our next panelist is Michael Gasser, right? From Eco-Partner. So, and EcoWork, sorry, EcoWork. Eco-Partner is Heinz, but Heinz cannot be with us. So, so we have Michael, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to check if this is the right one. Probably not. Oh, yeah, it is. So, I'm representing actually my co-founder, Deepali. who I think most of you know, and you know that she does not look anything like me. So I kindly ask you to suspend your disbelief, huh? And just act as if. And for those of you who don't know Deepali, just imagine me being a little bit less tall, but way more energetic. Okay, so with that out of the way, I represent EcoWork today. For those of you who don't know what EcoWork is, we are a startup that is building dismantling infrastructure for micro entrepreneurs. So this is our first pilot facility, and we have built in Delhi. Currently, it's still empty, but it is fully kitted out. And you as a micro entrepreneur can come to this facility and rent space for a day, for a month, for a week. You can rent storage, and you will also have the opportunity to connect with downstream buyers of your material. And we want to move material from the informal sector to the formal sector. So my points today, I think, first of all, are not so much on the framework conditions, which I think are really important, but we created EcoWork because we saw that, well, actually the framework conditions in India are not moving in the right direction. So we are now on, I think, the third iteration of the e-waste legislation, and we still have the same problems. And now the newest fad is that we generate certificates of recycled e-waste based on the aluminum and copper content in a PC, which I don't know why that would be needed, but that is where the direction is going. So we really don't see concrete infrastructure for bridging this gap with the informal sector. Is the other one? Ah, there we go. So what is needed? What is needed in our opinion is way more space for innovation, way more space to try things out. This is the facility we built. There's still a lot of things that need to be improved, but we just actually heard a few days ago that dismantling is now not considered a very hazardous activity. So it's not the same as dissolving PCBs in acid. Huh? So luckily we are at this point, but this is where regulation is right now. And we had to design our facility with these requirements in mind, which of course makes it entirely impossible to operate or offer services that are competitive on the market. And the second question is also about, well, how do you make this link? We talk about EPR systems, and I completely agree with all the panelists. We need to start thinking about global approaches to EPR. Because we have, according to Google, around 197 countries, and there's around 28 people in the room. So each of you, please set up e-waste recycling take-back systems for 7 countries. Not going to work, right? So we really need to have a global approach. And the second part is, this approach needs to come from the top, and it needs to be integrated all the way down. And we shouldn't stop at producers and importers, which are maybe 10 to 100 entities per country. But we have to think about each individual actor in the value chain, in the recycling value chain, which are 100,000s to millions of people, all with their own ideas, with their own needs, and everybody trying to make a living every day. And this is important. And let me finish with this last statement. We heard a lot about enforcement, and I think enforcement is important, but try to enforce in such an environment. It's entirely impossible. I would put this theory on the table and we can discuss it. It's impossible to even find where dismantling is happening, or to regulate it, or to enforce it. But what you need are market incentives that structure behavior in the right way, and that guarantee an income and a living. That's it from my end. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. And you actually already made my life very easy, because you were talking about global solutions, and one of the institutions working, let's say, globally on policy solutions, certainly ITU. And with that, I would like to invite Rosie to shortly present what you're working on at ITU.
Yeah, so at ITU, we've been doing a lot on e-waste policy over the past few years, and specifically looking at the extended producer responsibility aspect of that. And one of the major things we find for successful implementation is also the financing of it. So where does the financing come from? Who's going to finance it? Is, especially in developing countries, sometimes the producers who maybe are generating that e-waste is not necessarily in that country. So that's often a big gap to effective enforcement. And we can create a more enabling environment to really help support e-waste collection, take back, and to really keep up with the rise in e-waste generation. So for this to be effective, we need to think wide. E-waste is a cross-cutting topic. There's lots of different products, and some quite specialized as well. So there's a lot of actors which really need to be involved in the picture to be effective in the EPR side of things. And we can really build on some public-private partnerships for that. And there's lots of great examples across, which are working across different markets, different countries as well. So we can use these market-based models to really help improve and look at best practices there. And yeah, coming back to finance, and another good example is looking at how we can compensate for e-waste. We see this a bit more commonly, especially in the plastic scene. So can we take some lessons from plastic waste to apply a bit more to e-waste? And there's some really good examples of startups, various companies who are acting on this. So one of the examples we use quite a lot is Closing the Loop, where they take a fee and that'll support the collection of e-waste in developing countries. So that needs to be really integrated into the model you propose in a country. Another aspect with being ITU, we're focused on the digital aspects, and it's really important also to know you can help set up maybe a digital market to help buy, sell, reuse different types of equipment, especially used equipment, and having this online aspect also where you can keep your e-waste and also register it. And I think having this registration framework of knowing what is available and what is an important aspect to really be able to control, trace, track, monitor the amount of e-waste generated. So that's one aspect we've been exploring. We've been piloting that in Rwanda recently and exploring how we can implement EPR through this digital marketplace. And touching on some of what other people said, this whole actors approach is also very important. And sometimes it's a concept I think the We Forum have introduced, but it's a very important aspect where it's not just the producers, but you need to think of the regulators, consumers, retailers as well. It's a problem which impacts various people, and we've been for the consumer aspect. One example we felt was quite successful in another example in Rwanda was we done a pilot campaign. We got some competition running, set up collection points, and really integrated it with the ministry and the local companies. And that awareness raising can really help spread the word in the country. And then also the whole normalizing EPR. And I think that's a big aspect of it. And not only, it shouldn't just be producers who are the focus of your initiative, but the wider companies as well, and local take-back collection points. And yeah, this is just a quick overview of what this digital aspect, so a digital registration procedure would look like, and what we're trying to expand, explore in. So having your product registered and then also putting it in a registered EPR system. So it allows extra fee payment, connecting with different partners, etc. So that's a couple of things which ITU have been working on. Thanks.
Thank you, Rosie. It was quite interesting that you're coming from a global perspective and then you deep dive into one country case, what
Sorry.
digitalization can help. No, but that's actually necessary that we basically discuss how things can start working. And with that, I will introduce our last panelist, which is Alexander Jandrich, the Managing Director of the STEP Initiative. And I guess the pointer is there, and I will give the floor to you now.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So, yeah. My name is Alexander, and I'm here, Elizabeth, who was our previous managing director. And I would like to talk to you a bit about the solving the e-waste problem and some of the challenges and that we have noticed in the Global South and some of the activities that the initiative has done. The initiative itself is one of the oldest initiatives that was founded to tackle the problem of the e-waste already in the 2007. And since then has become independent and multi-stakeholder platform to prevent or manage environmentally, economically, and ethically sound way the e-waste. What is particularly interesting about the e-waste STEP initiative is that it is a conglomeration of different actors, stakeholders, private companies, regulatory agencies, other initiatives, and so on. So it gives us unique perspective to be on the spot, on the local spot where the problems are happening, to raise the issues and also to address these issues from different perspectives. And based on this unique position, I would like to show you or to introduce to you some of the challenges that we have noticed within the years, and then maybe to discuss with you also possible solutions. So first challenge that I would like to raise is the different levels of e-waste management development. And with this, I would like to say geography matters. And as we can see here, this refrigerator is placed in a beautiful park that is really amazing, but we have a refrigerator there. And this is something that you wouldn't usually see, for example, here in Geneva, in Switzerland. But I would like to ask you to imagine that around Switzerland, there are hundreds of kilometers of sea. Let's say that the Switzerland does not have 11, 12 million people, but it has 300,000. I could bet with you that we would even see here in Geneva some problems like this if the logistical constraints are same or similar. So islands, mountainous regions, deserts, dense forests, and so on have impact on how the e-waste management will look locally and how big the challenge is going to be. Of course, then the population densities is also one big aspect, and this means that we are constantly hearing that there is more and more e-waste, and this is definitely true. But there is certain aspect of this e-waste that brings revenue, and this revenue then is used to finance the other aspects of the e-waste or treatment practices that are that do not bring revenue. So if you have low population densities, there is often not a critical mass of e-waste that would be able to finance some investments in the structure or the treatment of the e-waste and infrastructure. And these are the reasons why there are stark differences very often in the countries, even within the countries. So you would have a certain level of e-waste management in the capital city or the population center, and the situation would look very different in the other provinces. Another issue that we have seen and has been raised by the other panelists very much this time is the legislative and governance problems. And of course, first of them is either the lack of regulations and legislation or inability to enforce this legislation. And we've seen from the other panelists why these are the issues. Then there are complex and oversized administrative bureaucracies. This means that very often the e-waste is not tackled from the governmental side from one particular agency or ministry, but we would have Environmental Protection Agency, we would have Ministry of Mining, for example, involved. We will have the Ministry of Economics, Ministry of Labor, and all of them would have a specific part of the e-waste that are in charge of. And this means that the coordination between all of these bodies and finding who is really responsible for what is very challenging. And then finally, very often the governmental representatives are faced with one crucial issue. And this is that if there is an entrepreneurial force behind and saying, okay, we would like to invest or would like to do something new and would like to introduce some technology, then the dilemma that very often the governmental agencies are facing is, if I do nothing, nothing will happen, so the situation stays as it is. If I do something, there is a risk that maybe this new technology will cause even significantly higher environmental problems that the current situation is. So the tendency very often is just do nothing or not do nothing in my legislative period, and then we'll find someone else who's going to be responsible for these things. Finally, the challenges in global engagement. And the first and foremost of this is the lack of initial capital investment. And this is ranging between different things. It could be as little as building a solid floor where you could move the materials around, buying a simple scale to know what fractions are you using, or what is the turnover within your own company. But it could be also in the places where the critical mass of electronic waste is reached, the wish and the entrepreneurial force is there, but there is lacking capital. So the international capital is not going in there, or the costs of the capital are too high for these entrepreneurs to be able to invest. And this then forwards into the passivity of the global e-waste trends. So as I have highlighted with the problems with the legislative and regulatory bodies on the national level, very similar is also on the global level. So if I do nothing, nobody could make any assumptions to if I did something wrong. So the passivity is as easier of the two choices. Then investment in the flashy technology. This is something then, okay, I have to do something. There is some capital. And then for many, many years, the investment was, okay, let's build something that's completely automated, because we went, for example, to Germany or Switzerland when we saw it functions well. So we will implement it here without a lot of thinking, okay, if this is really answering the needs of the local situation. And then even effectiveness in unsustainability. So if the wrong technology has been implemented, then it will not be used. And finally, it will then die off and it will not be sustainable. So how STEP initiative is addressing some of these challenges, and how do we think it could be addressed? One of the things is to creating the space where different stakeholders can meet. This means that invite the governmental representatives, invite the universities, invite the companies to sit at the same table. Very often universities are very eager to cooperate with the companies, to have some real life examples where the students will be able to learn and teach on the real life examples. It could be also that the governmental bodies have the opportunity to say, okay, these are our priorities, and please, recyclers, don't do these things and do those things, and then we could solve these issues and stuff like that. So the STEP is trying to provide this infrastructure, either through its working groups, through webinars, or the different kinds of stakeholders where they meet together. Then amplify local problems and ideas. We have seen this very good at this conference, but it is not always the case. So if we are talking about some issues somewhere else, it would be really nice to have people from somewhere else to present this issue. Then to create tools for effective solutions. One of the most famous tools that the STEP has developed is the recycling tool. It's a very simple tool. It uses the Excel spreadsheets, has different fractions, and gives you the opportunity as an entrepreneur or a student or a governmental body to see, okay, these are the hazardous fractions, these are revenue bringing fractions, these are the relations in the prices between these fractions, and then you can start and build from there. And finally, providing mentoring, training, and support. And this is also a very important thing, is where the role models are able to be in connect with the situations where the issues are arising on the one hand. On the other hand, also to something that we have been very proud of and that has been initiated since a couple of years, is to bringing the students and the teachers from different sides of the world together. So it is very interesting, or it was at least for me, when I was a student, to have a supervisor from some XY university, fancy university, that will be interested in my work, or to have for the teachers and the professors to have students from other countries that would then easily access them. So STEP also provides this opportunity for anyone who is interested. Finally, I would like to show you two publications. One is the Transboundary Movement of We in Latin America. And here we have, among others, Joana Rosales, who was working on this publication. This is really amazing publication for one particular reason, is because it gives you an input and a very nice and extensive interviews across the Latin America, across different stakeholders, meaning companies, recyclers, EPA agencies. What do they think, what the reasons are, or the burning questions are? And some of these things that I have highlighted today, you can find there. The other one is also very nice a paper that was already introduced today. I will just show you again. It gives a great overview of the EPR schemes, but also that these schemes are not the only solution. So you have different solutions very condensed in one very, very high quality paper. So if you are interested in these papers, you can take a photo of this QR code. You can find them there, and all of the other STEP publications. With this, I thank you very much for the time.
Thanks a lot, Alexander. Please take a seat over here. I think the two chairs don't need to sit. they can share. So it was actually quite a remarkable and interesting, let's say, introduction of the panelists, and we call for a lot of, let's say, global solutions, which will, in a global framework, it will take time. We heard right now action, complementary action. We need as well action, we need to localize it. It was very interesting as well from the side of Michael that concrete work requires, let's say, stable frameworks, which might not necessarily always be the case. And the whole point of let's say today's discussion was, okay, how do we actually get things working? And I've spotted some people in the audience already that actually do environmentally sound management. And I would like to invite Nana or Johanna to bring their perspectives based on running actually a facility that is providing these services to society and of course as well to earn money, what their thoughts would be on what is actually needed that you can bring more action on the ground, and what you would, let's say, recommend to us to do more. So maybe Nana, you can start there.
In his chat with Andreas Meinert from Oeko-Institut, and then I asked him the question, Andreas, is it possible to do clean recycling? And his answer was, if you are human conscious, then it's quite possible. You know, I mean, if you don't look too much on the profit side. And I thought about this discussion the whole yesterday evening, this morning, and I realized that all the biggest recycling company, I cannot mention names, even in Europe, they're making so much money. And every time in the business world, when someone makes much money, somebody suffers at the other side, you know. So what we have done in Ghana is, of course, people say without incentives, it's very difficult to run recycling facility, but we as an entrepreneur, we always look for a solution without support, and we still need to move when supports are delaying. And for instance, the CLT is a huge problem in Ghana, and I spoke with my team about what can we do, and we came up with our repurpose television, and we said, why don't we trade in the old CLTs, you know, so that people at least can have a better one, and it works. So I think when we look, for instance, at the Asian model, how do they succeed? Of course, in part of the Asia, they had a nose mask on before COVID came, you know, because they pollute the environment. But end of the day, they were successful. I mean, for their own mistakes that they did, there was no much foreign interference, you know. And I don't know if it's unfortunate or fortunate with Ghana, with Africa. It's always problem. You know, when I thought my daughter is here with me and I asked, I told her that we are doing recycling in Ghana. She said, Papa, are you sending waste to Ghana? You know, even the perception, it doesn't put us in a better situation, but it's a resource. We don't call it waste. It's a resource. It can create green job. Actually, we should try and find a solution together. I mean, the whole world speaks about circular economy, but here in Europe, I think apart from car sharing, I don't know what kind of a product that people reuse it. You know, I mean, in Ghana or Africa, West Africa, iPhone 6, 7, Samsung, the first generation of mobile phone. It's for them. It's I think iPhone 14 or 15. You know, so where can you really contribute to a better circular economy? So I want to take this opportunity not to look too much at the problems, but also at the solution. You know, we came here on our own without any support, you know, and sometimes the money we spend on to discuss the problem, it can solve, I mean, you know, some part. Thank you.
Thank you, Nana. Jana, do you want to add anything? So thank you for being as well critical with us. That's highly appreciated. That not everything we do is not necessarily right, and that interference is not well, has as well implications, to say the least. And maybe Johanna, you can add something to that.
So yeah, I was listening to your presentations, and it was interesting for me, the analysis being made here, because there's a lot of cultural things that probably are not being considered sometimes. And we usually look up to Europe and the US for solutions, and then we try to implement them back home as good as best as we can. But then there are a lot of cultural things that might not work. And I was thinking that probably that is one of the main challenging things that we have in order to implement a solution in the Global South, is that probably we are trying to import and not really tropicalize the solutions that well. That would be one of the main things in terms of, for instance, informal sector. It sounds a lot easier or romantic than it is actually to try to make it part of the e-waste management system, as well as like public-private partnerships, like working with governments and agencies and municipalities in LATAM, let's say, is not as efficient sometimes as in other parts of the world. So, and in terms of solutions, so far, I am pretty convinced that probably for the Global South, if we have learned something from the North, is that maybe we need to address the problem in a more holistic, regional way, probably, instead of just country by country in terms of defining each their own legislation, each their own e-waste program, each their own capabilities. Probably it's wiser to make it more efficient in terms of have a regional solution. Problem is that maybe that will need a lot of coordination amongst our countries. But I definitely strongly believe on that.
Okay, thank you very much for your statement. I have to do the advocatus diaboli now, because and ask some key questions, and I would like to address it to the panel here, but also maybe to the wider floor. To many things that I heard, I would not agree. And I do not agree, for example, that waste is a resource, or I do not agree at all that we have to educate or that we have to change the culture or anything. It's the economics, to be honest. It is, and it is, from my perspective, my personal perspective, this slide, if, go back, please, no, this way. If we are not able to make regulation happen or make a right price interventions, it will always be more economic to dump. Yeah, it's that easy, because you make more money. Why would you not do it? If I can get away in just, you know, dismantle and then dump, then you do it. And at the same time, we have to understand that many people in the world just need to survive. They just need to eat. And here I would like to play this back into our panel, but also if you have additions to this, where can we start? What is the starting point? We hear a lot on international EPR and so on. And there were some little, how can I turn it, interventions, like the compensation is coming up. We discussed it this morning with criteria and so on. But what is the starting point? What do we need? Because now we are all together reflecting what we've done for 10 years. Where do we go from here? Otmar. Okay, so then I asked the panelists first, and okay, didn't see you, Matthias, sorry. So Matthias, please.
Yeah, first, with the cultural thing, I tend to agree with you, and I wanted to add here something. And I also, you know, there was often an excuse in many countries, oh, we have a different culture. I say, no, that's not a culture, that's your habit, and it's a bad habit, and you have to change it. So please, the cultural thing, sometimes it's true, but sometimes it's really also not true. And the money, of course, is also very important. I just come back to my boring things. But it has been proven we had success with a lot of countries. And it's really key also, I mean, you said, okay, framework conditional law, and you saw you showed this picture. It depends on what level you're looking, but we have to start with legislation. I mean, we need these framework conditions in place. And actually we realized when we do this right, other things which we think is not solvable, we cannot solve it, they fall in place. No, it suddenly we solved the problem. Not entirely and not perfectly, and I know the informal sector, you know, we have successful countries in Peru and Colombia, which we just closed our activities. And I have to say, what is not satisfactory is that actually we haven't really completely solved the issue with the informal sector, although we are on a path and the countries are on a good path to it. But just, and yeah, and it takes time. And I just wanted to also make this intervention because I will have to leave. I have a few other things to do. So please excuse me when I stand up and I will leave the panel.
Of course. Thank you, Matthias. So anybody else from, yeah, Samson, go ahead.
Yes, I think that the problem should not be looked only as economics, as your graph portrays. There is also societal good. And I am not an economist, but from environmental perspective, if you want to solve a problem only from economic side, you also tend to neglect other important aspects. Yes, I'll give you one example from Ghana. Matthias has over 10 years experience working in Ghana, and so he relates to this. Ghana used to have informal lead acid battery recycling at Aguglushi. You will likely go to that scrapyard and find that the informal sector guys have collected lead acid batteries, cracked them, and they were smelting on site using all the crude method. Yes, I see some facial expressions coming up, but this was what was happening. Now, over time, through trainings and other interventions from SRI and other projects, this has completely left the informal sector. They no longer do the open smelting that they were doing 10 years ago. Now they hand over the batteries to the former recycling entities. Of course, there are challenges there as well because the recycling entities are looking for batteries without acids. But you notice that the combination of education, training, and the economy of scale is able to move some of the worst practices into good practice. This is what we should be aiming at and building on, because the success factors we have achieved in Ghana in some of the areas has to do with a mixture of strategies and not one approach. Economics alone is not enough. Training, framework conditions. For example, we are working with companies like electro recycling, who had huge piles of e-waste plastics in their facility. The question is, how do they do the sorting to make these plastics more usable? It has to take the SRI program through training to now push them gradually into making the best use of these plastics. We have a local government system in Ghana where the local government don't even understand what the scrap dealers are doing. They don't even know what kind of activity goes on in the scrapyard. They see these scrap dealers as thieves, as armed robbers, as any negative description you can give. Over the past 2 years, together with the GIZ activities program, we are providing training to the local government authorities to understand what it means to operate a scrapyard. And now we see the local government authorities changing from their antagonistic posture initially into a more cooperative posture with these scrap dealers. So there is the need to actually build on these success factors: training, framework conditions, of course, the economic instruments that can drive these processes forward. In my opinion, this would be the initial comments I'll make.
Thank you very much, Samson. And now we have someone in the floor. Otmar, you don't want to say anything? Okay, then Hossam. And Andreas.
Yeah.
He withdrew.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all the interesting presentation. Actually, it's not the issue of culture or the issue of economy. The issue that the countries need to understand that the pricing of a product should include end-of-life processing. It does make a difference if it's electrical or not electrical, but this need to be integrated when they are selling any product. There is any product, there is end-of-life processing for it. The main challenge always that when we start with e-waste, it's a specific product, and sometimes it's not the majority of the products in the government that they would look like for it or priority for it. So one essence, I believe that we need all of us with all our relations with different organizations is to try to enforce or try to highlight the need to identifying the cost of any product is being sold in the country. By this way, it will be easier for all of us. I was just coming from the plenary F, where I'm talking about health electronic equipment, and they are talking about something that they are still like 10 years what we were discussing in the STEP initiative. So this is an issue that needs to be highlighted not as electronic waste, but as end of product processing, end of life processing for any product is being locally developed or imported or exported. The end of life processing of the product, this is the most important thing need to be highlighted. And we cannot do it alone with e-waste. It need to be done with every products being sold in the markets, even packaging, even plastics. In Egypt, they have highlighting the priorities for APR, which is, this is what we are all trying to process for plastics and e-waste. But all other products is crucial. You cannot leave this only, and you're selling not much quantities, let's say, of electronic equipment as other products, which has major impact on the environment. So the issue is not the electronic equipment. The issue is that the policymakers need to know that end-of-life processing is crucial for the pricing of any product. Thank you.
Thank you for the intervention. It's actually a completely new aspect that we maybe start to focus on properties of products, and electronics are just one product type, and the principles will be the same for many others. So thank you for that one. And I saw Andreas raising his hand. So please.
Yes, I think I wanted to give some thoughts on this debate, national EPR system versus international. I certainly agree that national solutions are the first one to start with. But I tend to agree with Andreas' bill that it will not be feasible so soon to really have EPR systems well developed in every country. So should we think about a system bridging this gap? I think we should. Producers are selling products all over the world. They pay their EPR fees in the countries they are obliged to, and they don't pay the fees in other countries.
No.
Is this fair?
No.
Probably not. So should we not think about a system? And then it gets very difficult how to start. And probably Alexander Janrich gave the answer. Small island states. This is where it's, for example, particularly difficult. Why don't we start with a system saying we set up a global fund with, let's say, results-based financing? So everybody who can prove to, in a certain setting, remote island state, for example, manages a certain amount, will be compensated according to a certain fee structure, of course, according to quality requirements as well. And this could be a starting point, also thinking, okay, what's the link between national and international? But I think to give it a tangible start, we should think about a tangible starting point. And ideally, it should be financed by those who earn money with the products. So probably not a big donor, but OEMs. I also think that this could be an effort we could probably call for from this resources forum. How this is set up, probably more brains are needed. Thanks a lot.
So thanks a lot, Andreas, for that perspective. We're already a bit over time, but I guess we can have another 3 minutes. And I would like to invite our panelists that they can make a very short closing remark that based on the discussion today, or what would be, let's say, absolutely key for you? What would be the number one priority you would suggest that if we call for something, what Andreas just suggested, that should be in that call to get action on the ground. And it will just start with our last panelist, Alexander, and then we just go to Rosie.
Yeah, thanks. In my opinion, what was really great and what I see the light going forward is all of these enthusiastic people today who participated in the panel, and also you as the audience here, offering different solutions, different opinions and so on. And I think this is the way, as long as we have enthusiasm and wish to go forward and have the plurality of these approaches, one of them will be shown as probably as a winning one. So this would be on my side.
I think from my end, I just want to continue on what Andreas said. How do we build kind of an international solution? And for me, it's still a big question. How do we market? How do we sell a better e-waste system to decision makers? I've heard there has been some very great plenary speak yesterday on social engineering or regulatory engineering, I believe you called it.
Political engineering.
So whoever decides what these, how things are being built, what systems are being built, what kind of regulations are being built, what are actually their requirements, how they can they benefit, what can an improved e-waste management system bring to these people. I think this is really the challenge I would like to put forward. I think none of us in here is a salesperson, but maybe we would need that. Whether it is a higher tax base, whether it is healthy people, whether it is happy voters, I think that is the key challenge. And I think we have to rethink of how we sell a better e-waste management system.
Thank you. In my initial opening remarks, I mentioned the issue of global EPR system as one of the key issues we need to address. That on one hand, OEMs are unwilling to pay taxes at the local level. On the other hand, they are also unwilling to take up their responsibilities and dirty their hands in managing the product they put on our market. If we are able to properly address this, companies like Electro Recycling or Joanna's company in Ecuador will have enough leverage to manage the materials. On the political side, I think we need a certain level of push at some level so that these politicians who make decisions on our behalf mostly will recognize the need for global approach to these e-waste management systems. If you come to West Africa, every country in West Africa has its own system of managing waste. And this makes it very difficult for companies that are operating within the South region. In East Africa, you have issues of Bamako Convention. That even prevents the movement of hazardous waste from one country to another. That is why we need these harmonized systems to operate so that we can see e-waste as a business that creates jobs for our people. But until then, we'll continue to have these fragmentations. And so if I want to take any call from this room, I said, we have been lagging for far too long, more than 10 years of discussing e-waste. We need action at the global level, not just Basel Convention, but also on the financial mechanisms to drive the Basel Convention to sustainability. This is a call I want to take from this session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I resonate a lot what you're saying. We need global producer accountability. Really, we need to take the producers to task. I'm still having bad sleeps because I heard yesterday this talk about the Congo, I mean, producer accountability, and that needs to go and hand in hand with product traceability, last mile traceability. I think it's super important. And we need to use and start things like the blockchain and the Internet of Things that works in our favor to be able to develop digital passports. I think the time is there. And I do think with digital passports that tell us really a story where the stuff comes from, combined with consumer education, hopefully we can start creating a pressure. I would like in future to be able and buy the Evolution 2000 from HP that tells me that, 80% of the gold is sustainably harvested from South Africa or something like this. It might be, I really do think that this is now time to put it into practice. We've talked a lot about it the last 10 years already about traceability, and it's in the ISO document. But what we need now is a pilot project that can actually demonstrate along a product, the entire value chain, and really see how we can actually break this apart so that we see exactly what's going on.
And from my side, I'd say with the work we're doing at ITU, we're very much focused on the policy, regulatory development. And one of the big aspects is, okay, developing a bit of paper, but how do we actually get the countries to implement it? So going to that next stage, I think that's a big barrier, a big challenge for many countries. There's a lot of good models, good examples of good e-waste management regulation policy out there, but it's going to that next stage. And just to follow on from Sana said, was the digital product passports. That's also something, it's very popular in the EU at the moment. We're developing a standard on it within ITU as well. But I think my big thing with DPPs is, especially with the circular economy, how do we trace when we start breaking up the products and reusing? And I think that's a big aspect, especially for certain countries where there is a big cultural thing with making
a loop on externalizing costs that are ending up as pollution issues in the global south as well. I think this whole cost externalization of producers needs to stop. We need a fair price to see what's going on.
So with that statement, I would like to bring the session to an end. So big round of applause for our panelists. And yeah, we will sit together and think around whether we can come to, let's say, create a joint call for something. I will take as well your advice of what we do not want. Maybe we can easily agree on that one. And hopefully we'll come up with something we agree on how to actually initiate this change we all want to see happening. So thank you, and looking forward to talking to you bilaterally.